looking at 13th and 14th century art in Italy. Again, it's a little bit awkward to start with the Renaissance if you don't know what's come before. So if you don't have a background in European history, or if you're confused and need a little bit more background, please feel free to reach out to me either in my office hours or via email. The 13th and 14th centuries are often referred to as kind of the Proto-Renaissance, the kind of foundations of the Renaissance. And at this time, we really start seeing a shift from kind of earlier, what's often referred to as medieval preoccupations with kind of otherworldly values that are being replaced with kind of what we think of as more Renaissance value, an interest in the natural world, a revival in the interest of the art of classical antiquity, the art of ancient Rome and Greece. Now, this is, again, this shifting period. So we're going to look at a few examples today in the material for this module that are suggestive of these kinds of shifts in values. Before we get to those examples, I want us to kind of focus on some of the historical events of this time period. Your textbook very nicely kind of lays out some of the important historical events of the different time periods that we'll be looking at. So make sure that you turn to your book as a resource in rooting you in the history of the time. Also in the maps of the places that we'll be looking at. So that's what we're starting off looking at today, just so that you get a sense of, in the 13th and 14th century, Italy wasn't a unified entity. It's more these individual city-states that are in many ways competing with each other. And the first historical event that I want us to focus on in many ways deals with this idea of competition, and this is the Great Schism. The Great Schism starts in 1305 with the election of a French pope rather than an Italian pope, really. And this French pope moves the seat of the papacy out of Rome and into Avignon. And this is really important because this creates a power vacuum and a patronage vacuum in many ways in the Italian peninsula. And so we start seeing these other city-states having really an influx of artists who formerly were working in Rome, but also kind of competing with the other city-states rather than kind of having the seat of the Catholic Church kind of pulling in that art patronage. Now, this is mitigated a little bit in 1378 when there is an election of two popes, one who sits in Rome and one who sits in Avignon. It's really not until the 15th century, in 1417, when the Roman pope is accepted by all of Catholicism as the singular pope of the church. Now, one of the things that happens in this, a little over 100-year period is that, one, we already mentioned this idea of the kind of competition between the different city-states, but also there's a rise in the importance of the mendicants. These are monastic orders, monks, and the mendicants are often referred to as kind of begging friars. And one of the things that happens is that Italian citizens at the time, because of their devotion to Catholicism, were looking for new outlets to kind of show their devotion. And so the mendicants are often on the receiving end of this. And so we see an influx in the construction of large churches throughout the Italian peninsula at this time. Again, so it's this vacuum that's created by the Roman papacy leaving, being resettled in France, that we see on the Italian peninsula, seeing this kind of influx of construction of large churches. One of the other things that we start seeing coming about is this idea of an international style. Again, this is a result of the Great Schism. What starts happening is that some of the elements of Northern European and French artistic styles are being introduced into the Italian peninsula, right? So this idea that there's kind of a greater mixing of ideas that's happening as a result of the schism, as a result of Avignon bringing in these new artistic patrons that are then introduced to an Italian audience. So we'll talk kind of about the specifics of this piece, or I'll show you a video that goes into some more of the specifics of this piece in terms of its iconography and its background. But what I want you to also kind of think about is this idea of the kind of the so-called international style that's popular in Europe in the 14th century. Again, we see the kind of the French medieval period stylistic elements kind of creeping in to Italy, to Siena in this particular example, as they have increased contact in that papal court in Avignon. And so again, look at the Smart History video for this piece in order to get a sense of some of the other kind of artistic elements that we see coming about. I'd also like to, at this point, direct your attention to the beginning of your book, so that you can get a better sense for some of the vocabulary terms. For those of you who do not have a background in Catholicism and Christianity, there is a section in the front that reviews many of these terms, such as an enunciation. For these first 2 units, you'll really need to brush up on that kind of vocabulary. And this is something, I learned these terms in an art history class very much like the one that you guys are enrolled in right now with me. So learning that an enunciation is that moment when the angel Gabriel comes down to the Virgin Mary and lets her know that she's been chosen by God to be the mother of Christ, right? So again, keep in mind, I'm not asking you to kind of accept these as religious doctrine or to kind of believe in them in some sort of kind of religious faith. Rather, I'm asking you to understand what these terms mean from a Christian, and in this case, a Catholic perspective. So please do kind of brush up on those vocabulary terms that you can find in the introductory sections of your textbook. Now, the main examples that we're going to be looking at in this the unit on 13th and 14th century art, we're going to look at a father-son duo. We'll be looking at Giovanni and Nicola Pisano, and you can see the distinction in their in the creation dates of these 2 pieces, and these will form an example so that we can see kind of this shift in how it's taking place. We're going to be looking at kind of the shift of a particular iconographic theme, the depiction of the Virgin Mary, who's often referred to as the Madonna and Child. And then we're going to look at some architecture and some architectural decoration as the kind of last set of examples that we're going to be looking at in 13th and 14th century Italian art.